74% of retirees worried that a market crash could drain their savings. And when you spend decades building those up, the idea of losing it all overnight can be terrifying. But the real risk to your retirement isn't a market crash. The data shows it's a slower, quieter risk most people completely overlook. So in this video, I'll show you what that risk is, how market crashes really affect your plan, and what you can do to defend your savings from both of those risks. To start, you need to know what a market crash can actually mean for your retirement, and why it's so many retirees' biggest fear. This study, titled The Impact of a Bad Start, shows two retirees. They both have the same amount saved, take the same amount out every year, and earn the same average returns. The only difference is when those returns happen. Alan, the red line, retires straight into a market crash. It crushes his savings early on, and they never recover. Charlie, the green line, retired 10 years before Alan, and because of that head start, his money lasts years longer, even though he faced the same drop that made Alan run out of money. For these two, timing made all the difference, so it's easy to see why so many retirees fear that same bad timing. But here's what most people miss. That exact scenario almost never happens. In our example, the market fell 15% a year for 3 years straight. But in the real world, that's almost unheard of. The S&P 500 index has only had a 3-year streak like that once in the last century, during the Great Depression. And if you include dividends, it's actually never happened at all. So if we don't have to worry about that kind of crash, what about the drops you might actually live through? This visual shows the S&P and all the pullbacks along the way. The lighter bars are the smaller dips, corrections between 10% and 20%. The orange bars are the bigger ones, bear markets that fall more than 20%. The smaller drops happen very frequently, roughly every couple of years, but on average, they only last around 4 months. The bigger drops don't happen nearly as often, and when they do, they still only last about 11 months. So even though these drops can be big, they're short-lived, far shorter than most retirees expect. But if the drops themselves don't last very long, what about the recoveries? This chart shows the major market drops and how long they took to recover. Each row is a different bear market, and these columns show how the market performed 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years after each crash. After the COVID crash, the market was up nearly 75% just 1 year later. After 2008, it climbed about 45% in the following year. And it's not just those two. The averages across the bottom tell the same story. After 1 year, the typical recovery is strong, and after 5 years, the market has nearly doubled. So even though these drops can feel scary, history shows the recoveries have been strong and fast. But now, let's look at what one of these crashes could actually mean for your retirement, and whether it's really the kind of risk that can drain your savings. First, here's what a crash looks like when you're not taking any money out. The blue line shows a steady return each year. The red line shows a crash like 2008 or COVID. A sharp drop early on, followed by a fast recovery. And by year 3, you're right back on track, almost like the crash never happened. But that's not how retirement works. Once you start taking money out each year, those same drops can hit much harder. So now, let's add that in. The blue line still shows a steady path, and the red line has the same early crash. But look what happens. Because you're taking money out, the dip goes a little deeper. But the recovery is still quick, because the downturn itself is so short. And even though you don't get back to the original path, your portfolio still grows to almost twice what you started with. So yes, a crash can be uncomfortable, but it's almost never what breaks a retirement plan. The bigger risk isn't fast or dramatic. It's slower, quieter, and much easier to overlook. And once you see how it works, you'll understand why it can quietly drain more retirements than any market crash ever has. Let's go back to the S&P 500 and focus on a different period. This is 2000 through 2010. No big crash at the start, no huge meltdown, just a long stretch where the market never really went anywhere. By the end of the decade, it actually finished a little lower than where it started. So let's take that same pattern and bring it into our retirement example. The purple line shows a slow decline, about 1.5% a year for a full decade. It doesn't look nearly as scary as a big crash, but look at what it does to your retirement. By the time that slow decline is over, the portfolio is almost gone, and it never recovers. So what makes the slow decline so much worse than a sharp drop? Let's pull up the same example we just used, the version without withdrawals, and now add the purple line showing the slow decline. When you're not taking money out, all 3 lines eventually end up in the same place, just different paths of getting there. It's once you add in withdrawals that the slow grind can become a disaster. Each year, you withdraw a little more, which leaves less invested, which means you miss more of the recovery. That's why it hasn't been the crash that ruins most retirements. It's been the long stretch of mediocre returns that quietly does the damage. Periods like 2000 to 2010 or the stagflation years of the 70s are the true danger. Not because they fall fast, but because by the time the recovery finally shows up, there's nothing left to recover. So now that you know the real risk, how do you defend yourself? People call 2000 to 2010 the lost decade because the S&P 500 went nowhere. But was it really lost? Here's the S&P, flat for almost the entire decade. But when you add bonds, the picture changes completely. Bonds didn't just hold steady. They grew almost every single year and nearly doubled. And when you layer in real estate, it looks even more different. Real estate had an incredible run, almost doubling twice. Even international stocks, which started off rough, still finished the decade with positive returns. But here's the problem. Since that decade, the S&P has surged, while those other options have lagged behind. So a strategy that would have won during that decade would have lost after it. And that leaves us with the real question. Where's the best place to invest for your retirement? To answer that, take a look at this visual. At first glance, it can look busy, but you don't need to read every square. Each color is a different type of investment, and each column is a year. The chart shows how each investment performed. Let's focus on just one of them, real estate. One year, it's at the very top. The next year, it's near the bottom, and then somewhere in the middle. It moves like the weather, constantly shifting with no pattern you can rely on. And that's the point. Just like the weather, yesterday tells you nothing about tomorrow. You'll never be able to consistently predict which box ends up at the top. But the good news is, you don't have to. Because what really matters is building a portfolio that holds up no matter which box is at the top or the bottom. So how do you actually do that? And how much does it really matter for your retirement? This chart makes it clear. The green line is the S&P 500, and the black line is a diversified portfolio. Look at the early 2000s, the so-called lost decade. The S&P went nowhere, but in this example, the diversified portfolio nearly doubled. And that's exactly why this matters. The same decade that could drain a retiree's savings becomes a decade of growth when you're diversified. And here's where the case for diversification gets even stronger. Even though mediocre returns may be the bigger risk that can make you run out of money, market crashes still feel awful when you're living through them. These red shaded areas highlight each bear market, and the boxes show how long they took to recover. In the first drop, the diversified portfolio recovered in just 8 months, while the S&P took 49 months, more than 4 years. In the next one, the diversified portfolio bounced back in just over a year, while the S&P took more than 3. So history shows you don't just get better defense, you can get a much smoother ride. And to top it off, even with the S&P's huge run in the second decade, you can see here that the diversified portfolio still finished ahead, and without the wild swings along the way. So now you can see why so many retirees end up worrying about the wrong thing. It's not the headline crash that has been the threat to retirement. It's been the long, quiet stretches of weak returns. And now you know exactly how you can defend yourself from both. But even with the right portfolio in place, there's still one problem that can quietly drain more money than any market drop ever will: taxes. Because if you don't have a strategy for how to take money out of your accounts, you can end up paying tens of thousands more than you need to. So watch this next. I'll show you the biggest mistake retirees make when planning for taxes, plus the 3 key levers that can save thousands and keep more of your money working for you.